right. So good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Good evening and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Nirav Patel, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for this webinar hosted by UPS Supply Chain Solutions. We've got an exciting session lined up for you, packed with insights to help you navigate the ever-evolving landscape of the logistics industry. But before I begin, I have a few admin updates to share. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be made available after the event. We do encourage participation, and we want to answer any questions you have. So please make use of the Q&A function at any point during this call. We will try our best to answer your questions live on this call, but if necessary, we will contact you privately after this call as well. Also, after the webinar has finished, please be on the lookout for a post-webinar survey pop-up. And if you can fill that in, we appreciate any and all feedback provided. But for legal purposes, I'm going to read the following message that's on your slide right now. This presentation is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with your own legal counsel for such advice. All right, so let's begin by welcoming our distinguished panel of speakers who bring a wealth of experience and insights to today's discussion. As mentioned, my name is Nirav Patel. I'm a senior product and marketing manager at UPS Supply Chain Solutions. The first speaker we'll have is Joe Green. He'll be covering global trends and policy impacts, followed by Lancelot and Keith, who will be talking about global air outlook. Steve McMichael will be covering the ocean freight market outlook, followed by Kelly, who's going to talk about customs regulations updates. And Aviva is going to talk about nearshoring benefits for agility and efficiency. And Eddie Sissel is going to close it out for us by talking about automation in warehousing and the customer experience. After our presenters are done with their presentations, we will use the latter half of this webinar for a Q&A. So please, again, use the chat function or Q&A function to put your questions in during the webinar, and we will do our best to address those questions at the end. So, without further ado, let's dive into our first topic, and I will hand it over to Joe Green to kick us off. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. Today I was just going to talk about three different impacts of tariffs on businesses, and these range from like short term to very long term. So first, I'm just going to talk about like what happens when a tariff is implemented. So a tariff is basically a tax on imported goods from a specific country that's levied on domestic businesses. So the first impact, and this is almost immediate, is there's going to be a depreciation in the local currency. So in this case, the dollar would become stronger, and specifically, we're talking about U.S. tariffs on China. So the immediate impact would be the dollar would appreciate against the Chinese yuan. Another impact of tariffs is that countries will reroute their goods. So instead of shipping from China to the US, they'll maybe ship from like China to Vietnam or China to Mexico before then going to the US to avoid tariffs. And the third impact is that it increases greenfield foreign direct investment. So this effectively means that Chinese firms will build manufacturing hubs outside of China to circumvent tariffs in the future. So next slide. So let's talk about first what happened the last time there was a trade war between US and China. So from 2018 to roughly 2020, we saw a series of increasing tariffs on Chinese goods. Now, the impact of that is over that time, the dollar gained about 10% of value against the yuan. So if you think of China as this giant like retail outlet where the U.S. consumer is buying a lot of goods, the tariff goods become more expensive. So, but the non-tariff goods actually become cheaper, and that's because of the change in the exchange rate. Okay, so the dollar becomes stronger, so that makes it cheaper for non-tariff goods. So during the first, as of 2023, around 2/3 of Chinese goods were exempted from tariffs. So that effectively means that those goods became cheaper, whereas the tariff goods became more expensive. So that was what happened with the Trump tariffs during his first term. In the second term, Biden, in his second term, Biden implemented tariffs as well. And again, we saw the yuan lose some value, though not nearly as much as we did the previous time. So let's go on to the next slide. So one of the impacts of tariffs, and this is specifically something we observed in the US, is that because of this, because of the depreciation of the local currency, tariffs on goods that are incompatible with the small package market, meaning goods that UPS is unlikely to ship, become cheaper, and it increases the demand. So as an example, like President Biden put tariffs on ship-to-shore cranes, critical minerals, and EVs. None of those are things that are likely to go via this, be shipped via the small package market. So it actually increased demand for non-tariff goods. So like finished consumer goods like laptops, smartphones were exempted. And so because of the depreciation of the currency, it actually increases demand for those goods. Next slide. The second impact of tariffs is that causes a rerouting of goods through third-party countries, specifically Vietnam and Mexico. A 2024 Harvard Business Review paper found that in the wake of Chinese tariffs, Vietnamese imports made up for nearly half of China's lost market share. So there was some degree of rerouting going there. Now that ranges from just outright fraud, where someone might ship a good to Vietnam and then just mark stamp it with made in Vietnam and then ship it to the US. But there are like legitimate ways to circumvent tariffs. So if a good is substantially transformed, then that's a legal way to avoid the tariff. So you ship the components for a TV to Vietnam, and then it's assembled there, then goes to the US to avoid the tariff. We observed a similar story in Mexico, where we've seen a huge surge in goods exported to Mexico since the tariffs went into effect in 2018. Next slide. The third effect of tariffs is that it increases greenfield foreign direct investment as a way to avoid tariffs. So greenfield FDI is when a company constructs a new facility outside of the country. So in 2023, we saw a huge surge in Chinese greenfield FDI. So this is China investing in Malaysia, Morocco, and other countries. So that increased by 225% from 2022, and nearly 3/4 of that was funding that was going specifically towards constructing new manufacturing facilities. So what we're observing is like a transition into the next phase of globalization, where China is no longer the world's factory doing all the manufacturing. And we're going to observe like more diversification, where there are many smaller countries that are doing some share of manufacturing. Next slide. So the places that, so these are the top 10 countries that Chinese firms invested in 2023. So this is where that 165 billion was going that I was talking about before. So Saudi Arabia and Kazakhstan represent energy investments, whereas like Malaysia, Vietnam, Egypt, and Morocco, those all represent manufacturing investments in new hubs. So like in Malaysia, they manufacture electronic equipment, as is in Vietnam. Egypt represents apparel, and Mexico represents vehicles and electronics. So these are the countries that firms should begin thinking about investing in the long run, because this is where we anticipate future manufacturing to be going. And with that, I will turn it over to Lancelot.
Thank you, Joe. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you stayed. I hope to use the next 5 minutes to walk you through how UPS are expecting the air freight market to evolve this year through macro perspective, capacity, market dynamics, and more importantly, potential disruptions, which Joe just mentioned about the tariff, which things that we're going to cover should be forming the core part of our logistic plan over the next 12 months. Four key areas that we need to stay tuned with current macro trend. I think the change of trade agreements and the tariff just mentioned will likely reshape the cargo markets, especially on major export economy as well as the emerging markets. So contractions could happen, stimulations of demands also will take place on some of the emerging market. We're expecting simply require all of us to stay agile to our capacity planning and logistic planning. Consumer behavior continue to fuel growth momentum of e-commerce, whose business model are evolving to improve their competitiveness. We are seeing them increasing emphasis on the end-to-end velocity and accuracy to improve customer satisfactions as well. Capacity constraints expect to remain through 2025. While we also see supply chain shift happens in 2024, actually has exposed some of the inadequacy of cargo infrastructure at certain airport last years as well. Geographic political uncertainties, inflated operations caused since COVID, new regulatory standards like SAF out of Europe, adding more complexity on managing our logistic budgets as well. In the capacity market, in general, the demand growth remain robust at the projections of 4 to 6% year on year. Obviously, it's slowing down against what we have experienced in 2024. We also anticipate to see imbalances growth by region or by countries. For example, Southeast Asia and India will continue to be benefited by the China Plus One activities. More production will be moving into those countries. Growth of China volume with the rest of the world may probably outpace US, contribute mainly by the e-commerce on emerging market like Latin and Middle East and Africa, as well as increasing their trade with Europe as well. Traditional verticals like high tech and retails, EV vehicles, automotive will continue its recovery at a slow pace, but also seeing more shift into ocean, or probably if you look at Asia to Europe, into a rail mode for savings as well. Front loading activity, it happens over the last 6 months as a result of a concern coming from ILA and tariff. Actually, we may expect to see some slowdown experience in the early part of this year as well. So from a capacity supply perspective, it will remain tight. The market in general project an improve of 2 to 3% year on year, mainly driven by the slow delivery of the new generation freighter, the 777, because of the supply chain constraints that some spare parts is behind the production schedule, as well as accelerate retirement of the old model 744 that some of the model has been holding back, and it's also time for them to retire as well. So similar to what industry had experienced last year. So limited capacity will prioritize by carriers on market with high growth view, especially those projected with excessive demand as a result of supply chain shift. So rates, more concerned, will remain elevated. We are expecting some market that could even lift it from what we see or from last year's level as well. So last one I want to cover is disruptions, right? So disruption is not very normal in the air freight market. Everyone stay informed of the policy changes, tracking news every day when we get up, and then forecasts become our daily routines. So I won't touch on the US tariff since Joe has already covered a lot. I think the next in line probably is the de minimis reforms. Will likely be impacting some of the e-commerce volumes as well as some of the general cargoes, which is under the de minimis clearance model right now. A lot out there, like the geo conflicts, economic uncertainty, disruptions on ocean freight, climate and extreme weather, they are all proven disruption we have experienced in the past, and we need to keep them under our radar as well. So in short, we want to highlight the importance of adapting to the evolving market conditions. So plan with flexibilities, but also plan for the unplanned, as we believe that 2025 won't be a year without surprises. With that, I hand over to Keith, our president of North America Freight Forwarding, to share his insight on North America markets. Keith, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lancelot. Appreciate it. Tariffs. That's all we hear about in the news, webinars, grocery stores, dinner table, drinking establishments. In another couple months, everybody we know may be experts in understanding what they are and the impact. But tariffs are not the only disruptor of planned sourcing. What about rises in labor cost, warehouse real estate and construction cost increases related to the foreign direct investment Joe talked about? What about increases in borrowing rates on inventory? We know interest rates are rising. These increased costs will create trade lane shifts and sourcing patterns not seen for decades. So what are these changes? We see a move away from the COVID era, which focused on supply chain resilience, to moving towards supply chain efficiency. So in the COVID area, there was an increase of multi-sourcing, increased inventories, buffer stocks to cover for disruption. We see that companies pushing away from that and moving into the efficiency space. So what this does is lean us towards less key providers with broader flexible solutions and products. Increased focus on just-in-time supply chain models, which will help reduce the inventory and improve balance sheets. Near and even onshoring changes to direct sourcing will reduce the impact of increased supply chain costs. And there will be a demand for a deeper reliance on providers with experienced humans to solve problems with limited or partial information. So what do? Let's go to the next slide. So our view is we need to action the supply chain adjustments now. First to market and change can differentiate your business and secure the best partners for the future. Don't forget about inventory carrying costs in your planning. Pretty sure your CFO will not forget about it either and put pressure in that area. Seamless and short notice change agility, Lancelot talked about, will become a competitive advantage. How quick you can learn and adjust will matter. For our healthcare customers, it will be a move to predictable and experienced quality temp control and dry van carriers. And then the other area is alignment of volume to experienced providers in nearshoring. Avoid learning expeditions with carriers or forwarders that are just exploring the nearshore market. My last comment is JIT models rise. These solutions are going to be dependent on technology, as in part, inventories sometimes balloon due to a lack of confidence in data, visibility, and what's in transit. So cheap transportation solutions without technology is just cheap. Even with all this complexity, great companies will thrive in 2025. So I'm going to jump this over to Steve McMichael. He's going to talk about ocean. Take it away, Steve.
Thank you, Keith. And on behalf of the UPS Ocean team globally, well, welcome and Happy New Year. Let's frame up what we think is in store for another unpredictable ride in the ocean industry in 25. You know, it continues to be a challenge to even give insight sometimes, even with our own executive leadership as we try to bring a predictable business plan, transportation budgets, certainly to Keith's point on inventory planning. What are the transit predictions that we can count on? The crystal ball has certainly been spot on in some years and in others certainly not. So we'll give it a try here in 25. as we frame up what we see as the 5 major driving forces behind the 25 ocean outlook. The good news is that we can safely now say that number 1 should not have a major impact. Of course, coming off the holidays and realizing what the East Coast longshoreman situation was looking like. As we know, the International Longshoremen Association and the United States Maritime Alliance reached a tentative agreement back in October. That was for the 62% wage increase over the next 6 years. That at least suspended the 3-day strike, leaving technology still on the table to be part of this extension until the 15th. Well, last week, I think as everybody knows now, they reached an agreement. The two sides came together, and in a joint statement, they stated we've protected union jobs. We've allowed ports on the East and Gulf Coast to modernize with new technology, making our port safer and more efficient and creating the capacity we need to keep our supply chain strong. Powerful statements by those two sides. And they said they were not releasing details of the agreement. They would do that after the actual contract's ratified, after all union members have had a chance to review. The UPS Public Relations team, our ocean product leadership team will continue to keep a close pulse and pass along those details. I would say certainly port authorities will be marketing any advances on technology as they look to differentiate, so we'll stay close to that as well. Number 2, Red Sea diversions. Back in October 23, Red Sea diversions became the hot topic and is still having an impact. Ocean carriers are expected to continue routing ships around Africa instead of through the Suez Canal. Carriers will continue to warn of increased transit times and higher rates as a result of that. Drewry, which is one of the publications we utilize, has confirmed that Red Sea diversions removed about 9% of the global capacity in 24. We will certainly monitor this with the new White House administration stance on the Middle East conflict and how any ceasefire impact will have on opening routes in 2025. Number 3 is that demand outlook, the demand growth. You will note well-established and respected maritime research firms on the slide that we use. Drewry, again, forecast 2.8% globally and a 10.2% in container volume growth on the Trans-Pacific trade. Double digits expected. National Retail Federation Global Port Tracker forecasting 6.8% in 25. So do we all subscribe to this robust demand, resilient global economy? Our customers are certainly our best information as you share purchase orders, as you share your volume forecast, and obviously we help you plan your supply chain. That will help us manage what we do believe is going to be a strong first half of the year for sure. The more predictable that your weekly, monthly volumes are shared with us, that'll help us with carrier allocations and ultimately lead to what is the new thing we're keeping an eye on, which is the Carrier Alliance Shuffle. This is certainly not the first time the carriers have changed their alliances, but we haven't seen this significant of an impact since 2017. There was the 2M alliance with Maersk and MSC that happened in 23, but we should expect some disruption now as Hapag-Lloyd joins up with Maersk and the Gemini Corporation. That will happen officially in February. The new Premier Alliance will be Hyundai, O&E, and Yang Ming. And then the Ocean Alliance will remain unchanged with CMA, COSCO, Evergreen, and OOCL. MSC will continue to operate independently. The carriers aim to increase efficiency, reliability, service coverage, but certainly we should expect some bumps along the way. Certainly as we go into contract negotiations, blank sailings, and customer service reliability, they'll have some definite growing pains there. And then if you haven't heard already, tariff uncertainty. And certainly our experts on the call already, and you'll hear more about this in the coming presentations. We know that customers have planned some accordingly, and has shifted. But again, it still remains a big question mark as we go into 25. You go to the next slide. This is really just another view to kind of frame up the rate conversation between the supply constraints, the demand drivers. We've talked about those top four on each side. Just know that blank sailings, we believe, will continue to be a biggest carrier lever to control capacity and market levels. As the alliances rebalance, we should continue to expect blank sailings. So it's critically important to have vendor bookings 3 to 4 weeks as a best practice. And certainly if we have POs and forecasts, as I mentioned earlier, as part of our supplier management offering, we can certainly assist in helping measure that booking compliance in your prioritization efforts. Certainly always keep in mind Lunar New Year, always a good reminder. This year we'll start on the 29th. So getting those boxes in those terminals before closure and certainly before the factories shut down, imported over the next couple of weeks. There is this global shift to protectionism, the global uncertainties, impact of the political climate, general shipping volatility. It drives us all crazy. And I would just use this quote from Drury that says, "There's a powerful sense now that we are heading into a new era of hyper-protectionism that will accelerate a shift away from long-distance shipping towards more regionalized services." We all hear about nearshoring. We certainly pay attention to the impacts of the tariffs in that remark, but ultimately it's finding that balanced supply chain and managing this from the overall rate discussion. My last comment here is, look at this volatility that we experienced in 24. Look where we were headed into the Trans-Pacific negotiations when the rates were pretty low. And then 2 weeks after those contracts signed, we saw an explosion in the rates. We do expect higher rates. Costs are going up for the carriers naturally. So we should be very close with our customers over the next several weeks in negotiations, and we will continue to publicize and try to manage this volatility, certainly from a rate perspective. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Kelly Wilton from our Global Compliance team.
All right, thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate that, and good day to everyone. So yeah, as you've been hearing for the last half hour or so, and for the last several months, the big question of the day is, will there be tariff implemented by the new administration? And this new administration takes office on January 20th. So the short answer is today, we don't know. January 20th, we should know. But so bottom line is we don't know what exactly will be implemented. We are suspecting something will be implemented because, during the campaign and in the lead up to inauguration, there have been lots of talk of tariffs. There have been talks of additional tariffs on China because they haven't done enough to stop all the fentanyl that's coming into the US. There have been talks of tariffs on Canada and Mexico because they've not done enough to stop drug trafficking or immigration. And there's even been talk of global tariffs, on every country of the world, just because, So all sorts of proposals, all sorts of maybe promises, threats, rhetoric, whatever you want to consider it. There's been tariffs have been the word of the day that's been tossed around. So, we don't know if tariffs would apply to specific commodities, specific countries, if it would be based on country of origin or country of export, most likely country of origin, because that's what precedent has always stated. We really don't have any details yet as to how this is going to shape up. But, numbers like 10%, 25%, even 60% have been thrown around. There was an article I had read last week where someone had said something to the effect of, take the threat of tariffs seriously, but don't take them literally. So, you may not see 25% on all Canadian goods. You may not see 10% on all goods from around the world. So take them seriously because something's likely to happen, but we can't take all of this conversation that's been going around literally at this point. We have to wait until after January 20th to find out exactly what direction it's going to take. So, while the president does have authority to implement tariffs, he's got very specific provisions of law that allow him to do that. But it's unlikely that they're going to be those proposed rates on day one. During his last term, we learned very clearly that President Trump preferred scalable rates, that are tied to his policy, to his goals, and it would, just to give him some negotiating leverage. So it's possible that if there are tariffs implemented, which is likely yes, it would likely be in increments of 5 to 10%, and then higher rates being applied if negotiations don't go the right way, or if there are select industries that have a lot of domestic competition. Those may attract higher rates. So at this point, could be the 5, 10, 60, whatever percent it could be, but we don't think it's going to start off on super high amounts. The next question always is when? When would this go into effect? So some of those specific authorities that are given to the president in regards to tariffs do allow for rapid implementation. He could do an executive order and it could go into effect within 3 days. For example, if he were to implement the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, those tariffs could take effect in really just a few days. This act does require that the president declares a national emergency related to national security, foreign policy, or the economy. So any of those 3 areas. And he needs to consult with Congress, but doesn't require the consent of Congress. So this could move forward within just a few days. If he were to use his authority for any of the other provisions, like we've all heard of Section 301 that we currently have with certain commodities from China, Section 232 that currently covers steel and aluminum, there's 201, 122, 388, all these different provisions of law that give the president power of tariffs. If any of those are used, it's likely that lawsuits would be filed. But unfortunately, those lawsuits would not stop the tariffs from going into effect. It just may draw it out, and if won, then refunds would have to be issued. So we have to again wait and see if he's going to exercise any of those rights. So the final question we usually get is, what can I do to prepare? So if a new tariff allows for exclusion or exemption, my recommendation is to explore that immediately, whether you qualify for it. And also engage in any industry associations you might be a part of to advocate for general exclusions for your industry. So most all tariffs that are issued have some sort of exclusion process. Make sure you stay on top of that. Also, use this time to make sure you're declaring the correct entered value. If your Incoterms allow for certain deductions from the value, make sure they're reported on the documentation you give to your broker so that we can report the proper value for duty to customs. And also explore diversification, right? Maybe accelerate any plans that you've been developing to reduce sourcing dependency. I'm going to say on China because that's where most of the tariffs are likely to center. So maybe it's time to ramp up those plans. And finally, on that, on to plan and prepare. Determine if you qualify for duty drawback. So if you export the goods that you've imported, whether it be without manufacturing them at all, or after you've manufactured into a new and different article. So explore if you'd qualify for duty drawback so you can recover most of those duties that you paid. But bottom line is to stay informed and really be prepared for anything. Okay. So on that note, I know we had a ton of questions come in on that, what we'll get to at the end, but I'm going to turn it over now to Aviva for her discussion on nearshoring.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I really appreciate that. As we've heard, there's been a lot of changes within the trade environment. And we've had many companies reach out to us, particularly a lot of distribution companies along the border that have a range of consumer products, ranging from textiles, purses, shoes, and have looked to UPS for guidance in these changing dynamics. What I want to say is that anytime there are changes in the market, there's an opportunity to make them a competitive advantage. It is difficult for companies often to change and adapt quickly. Those that can and solicit expert advice are the ones that really come out winning in these environments. With that being said, I want to highlight some additional changes that are important to know. Across US, Mexico, and Canada, they're increasing the need for additional information. Vague descriptions will no longer be accepted across all 3. Also in Mexico, tax ID importer is a requirement. highlights the need to have a highly compliant customs broker. In addition to that, in Mexico, there was a removal of textiles from the EMEX program, not allowing to defer duties and taxes anymore as of the 24th of December. These elements are really important that each company that is importing and exporting out of these locations are fully aware of these changes, because these are policies in order to ensure that there aren't any disruptions, as well as ensure that your supply chain business model is still allowing you to achieve your goals. With that being said, if we go to the next slide, one of the things I want to highlight here is that changes in policy will continue to happen, and they've always happened. What a supply chain needs to be based on are long-term kind of foundational elements that can be planned and forecasted for, because changing your supply chain is not always easy and fast. With that being said, the benefits of nearshoring still hold true regardless of what's happening within the trade environment. And some of those elements are lower labor costs and overhead costs. That's still going to be a key value proposition that allows companies to benefit from nearshoring strategy. Also, it reduces transportation costs, lower TNT. It allows you to optimize your cash flow. A lot of market proximity benefits that really extend to kind of these critical products if you're talking about medical and healthcare elements. And then last but not least, really critical is also intellectual property protection. You have highly unique products and specifications. Bringing them nearshoring allows you to help protect your IP. So remember, when you design your supply chain strategies, design them around core elements, foundational elements that you know will hold true, regardless of the dynamic changes that might be happening in the trade policy arena. If we go to kind of the next slide, please. Let's talk about how you can stay ahead and be kind of make these changes a competitive advantage. In addition to some of the advices that Keith and Kelly provided, some additional ones is really developing contingency plans and scenario planning. Is if this happens, then what would we do? Those elements really allow a company to change dynamically because they already know the strategy they would execute. They already have leadership engagement and agreement in it. So as changes happen, they're already a step ahead of their competition. In addition to that, to support those kind of additional contingency plans, request different transportation quotes. As changes happen, there are going to be kind of ripple effects, whether that be congestion or higher demand on certain lanes. And so by being ahead of the curve, it will allow you to kind of mitigate these ripple effects. Also strengthen your supplier relationships. Keith had a very good kind of prediction of where it's going to go, is that we're going to see a greater consolidation on suppliers. And I completely agree that improving those supplier relationships with that consolidation is really going to help you stay ahead. And then, of course, as Kelly said, stay ahead, monitor policy changes, and know as they're coming out. Really, the importance of scenario planning allows you to execute a plan well in advance, kind of as changes are happening. And it drives the alignment within your organization and helps mitigate any risk while also maximizing the benefit. One of the key values that we've kind of positioned to customers that have some type of textiles within the distribution space along the Mexico border is to divide their inventory, allowing them to fully kind of maximize the benefit of duty and tariff mitigation strategy while still kind of having the flexibility to distribute either out of the US or out of Mexico, depending on where their HTS code best benefits from that trade policy. And then with that being said, when you talk about scenario planning and how you want to do it, one of the examples we wanted to provide is how we're guiding our internal customers with some of these kind of EMAX changes. And so the way that we did it is we did it by a 2x2 matrix to divide our kind of customers that are reaching out to us for advice based on those that are still considering a nearshoring strategy versus those that are currently executing a nearshoring strategy. And then those that are executing either or considering a near distribution or a near manufacturing, because as these regulatory changes happen, these 4 buckets of customers have different kind of strategies that we're recommending to kind of pursue or evaluate. As you think about how you want to apply strategy to yourself in scenario planning, these might not be the best dimensions for your business, right? So some other dimensions to consider is country of origin of the goods being developed, customs value, commodity type. So this is just an example of how you can apply scenario planning to your business to help you stay ahead of any changes that could potentially be coming down the pipeline. We go to the next slide. When I talk about that kind of matrix, we apply then that matrix to potential scenarios. And these are just some of the scenarios that we've discussed, hypotheticals in Kelly's kind of review. And there are many more scenarios that you could come up with. These are just an example of some of the ones that we've kind of thought through strategically, which means there are no changes from a US perspective, that it only continues to have rhetoric in the news, but there are no changes executed. Then there is scenario 3, where those proposals are executed at 100%, or it could be step changed over time. We also look at kind of changes to potential 321 at different increments, and what would be those kind of actions or recommendations in those options. So again, reach out to your experts, talk to those who can help provide guidance in allowing you to make changes to your competitive advantage. And with that, I will turn it over to Eddie Cecil to close us out. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Viva. And we got just a few minutes here to keep us on time. I'm going to close this out here with the warehousing and distribution and the modernization trends. So if you can move to the next slide, please. You've heard throughout today's from the panelists increased cost. You've heard technology. You've heard safety, forecasting, and the importance of that. Modernization is enabling us to be more flexible and scalable with physical and digital technology. So how is modernization trends shaping the future? It starts with these 3 key items that you see here on the slide. Meeting our demands of the e-commerce growth. I take us back, we've talked a little bit about, the pandemic, impacts. How had you recently made purchases for your own merchandise? The growth in e-commerce has been on an exponential increase, which has made it very difficult to adjust. I'll talk about that as we move forward of how do we use the technology, digital and physical, to enable the throughput and changes required, by our customers. A lot of that's done through, again, advanced picking. As you see in the image on the right, it's a combination of physical and digital technology in conjunction with our human capital to be able to adapt to these changes. The shift from B2B to B2C has been, again, exponential. If you're currently insourcing, you've felt this. If you're outsourcing, again, I'm going to put the emphasis back on the importance of forecasting. Having that information, the technology is only as good as what you feed into it to optimize the supply chain, and in this case, the distribution of your goods. Employees, you hear a lot about the technology. What is that doing to the employee experience? Well, what it's doing, it's enabling us to reduce repetitive tasks digitally and physically. It's improving our worker safety. Having technology be goods to person versus walking a considerable amount of time in a warehouse improves our safety in the environment. It also improves, productivity and our overall worker experience, gamification. Anybody that's had experience in a warehouse, looking at an RF gun, reading that small green print can be difficult. Using the technology with a very color robust screen that is multilingual really helps the diverse work group that we are utilizing today in our warehouses. How is this evolution of technology through our partners enabling us to meet the needs through the ever-growing changes that we've talked about for the last 45 minutes? And that's just calibration with partners. And what I'll say is, less is more. Still being flexible, still being scalable, and being repeatable. Having all that technology speak to each other in a near real-time event enables us to, again, translate digital data into physical movements and ultimately, improve our cost to serve. So a strong calibration with partners, increasing process automation, reducing redundant tasks, and on that personalized solutions. The evolution of this partnership enables us, as you see on the far right there, a tote. If it fits in the tote, we're able to, again, pick, pack, and ship and provide flexibility based upon, your needs or your customer needs. Another piece of the warehouse is, again, big data. How are we using that big data? And again, I'm going to tailor that back to the importance of forecasting, transparency amongst your customers, you as a particular customer, and again, feeding the technology, enabling ourselves to, again, improve the overall experience for our employees and improve the experience, for our customers. So these three items, again, meeting the demands of e-commerce growth, we have to be flexible, you have to be nimble, and a combination of physical and digital. The enhancing the employee experience, while technology can be intimidating at some time, we are seeing great acceptance, improved productivity, and retention. And then the last, before turning it back to Nirav for some closing comments and Q&A, is the evolution of the technology. Technology changes every single day, and it's important for us to be transparent and changing with that to, again, meet and exceed customer expectation. So with that, Nirav, I will turn it over to you for Q&A and any closing comments.
Thank you, Eddie. See if my camera works. All right, here we go. Yeah, thank you, Eddie. I'd like to take some time to thank all of our speakers for sharing some really important insights from their respective areas of expertise. I think it was super helpful, especially at this time of the year, especially with an election cycle, some really important insights that they were able to share. So again, thank you very much to our speakers. What we'll do with the time that we have left over is we will do a Q&A. And it looks like we had a number of questions that came through, so thank you for your participation. So I will dive into the first question, and the first question is for you, Steve. The question is, what strategies can companies adopt to manage capacity fluctuations and demand volatility in ocean freight? And there's a second part of the question as well, if you can answer that. What innovations in ocean freight are we going to see in 2025?
Great question. A lot of ways to answer that, but I'll be brief with capacity fluctuation. As I mentioned earlier, forecasting is critical, and planning across multiple mode shifts can help with this disruption that we continue to experience in the ocean business. I am a big fan and big supporter of pushing purchase orders, vendor management. Let us, as your partner, be part of that forecasting and demand planning. Create mode shift flexibility, critical orders for air freight. We have preferred LCL that can help with some expedited ocean, and then work on the optimized routings, East Coast, West Coast, and of course, managing within the other trades. I would say open discussion on rates. The best thing you can do is have stability with your forwarding partners. Hopefully it's us, but rate shift, just like Eddie said, technology's changing every day, rates change every day. So it requires open discussion, because if you're changing forwarders, changing carriers every other week, how do you bring that stability into play? How do you play that forecasting and demand planning effectively? So we just ask that promotional rates to how contracts are being managed, create open discussion. Rest assured, competitive situation in our market will continue to be with us. And then I would say from a digital perspective, there's digital companies becoming forwarders. We are a forwarder becoming more digital. So with Forwarding Hub and self-service, ability to bring more digital visualization and analytics to your total supply chain is something we're all focused on. The question may be related to the port enhancements. I think we'll continue to learn that port by port, terminal by terminal, because I know the port authorities want to take the advantages of these new agreements with the ILW and ILA to really promote that. And then lastly, there is the flow initiative, freight logistics optimization works. The Department of Transportation with other industry partners, which we're a part of, are actively over the last 2 years in information exchange and integration views of supply chain. Huge benefit for the ocean that everybody should keep a pulse on the rest of this year.
Really great information, Steve. Thank you. Our next question is for you, Kelly, and this is a long one, so I will try and read it carefully. If you ship product to another country and assemble it there, it changes the country of manufacturer. If all product is manufactured in China and assembled in Taiwan, does this change the country of origin?
Yep, that's a great question, and keep these two concepts front of mind. You've got simple assembly versus substantial transformation. In order to change the country of origin, substantial transformation has to occur. So if the goods are just being assembled in Taiwan, for example, that country of origin remains China. So in order to, if new tariffs or the existing tariffs on China are in play, even if you assemble the goods in Taiwan or elsewhere, you're likely going to still be subject to those tariffs.
Right. And I have one more question for you, Kelly.
Sure.
The question is, much of our product country of origin is China. So how would that impact what we ship to the US from Canada tariff-wise?
So most tariffs, according to precedent, have been based on country of origin. So if there are new tariffs added to Canada, for example, it would likely be only Canadian origin goods. So if there are new and additional tariffs added to Chinese goods, in this case, you'd be impacted. So again, it's based on country of origin, not country of export, according to precedent. I have to be very clear on that. According to precedent, we don't know what's going to happen next week, but according to precedent, it's country of origin.
Thank you for that, Kelly. The next question is for you, Keith. What air freight value-added services should companies look for to stay competitive?
I think great question. I think I'll talk a little bit about the digital platforms that allow for instant service and cost comparisons without having to switch your providers. So there's a lot of portals out there that'll compare this carrier to that carrier and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes you get a good rate from it, but you burden your warehouse fulfillment with an additional vendor to have to create a process around, or you burden your back office in processing more AP transactions. And so a good example looking at what a portal like this that can help your business is checking out our UPS Forwarding Hub. In that environment, we do give, hey, what you're asking for is this quote. We do give you other alternatives to look at your fingertips, and then you can select. And of course, UPS would execute that movement. The other area is the difference between free data and pay for data. We all like free. We see free everywhere. We're all free people. We want free. But there's a difference in the use and the quality and even the representations of that data that can help speed up your decision making if you pay for it. So I encourage you to look at those differences. Most companies have the budget for paid data, but I think paid transportation data is super valuable for you to move faster, be agile, make good future predictive and planning decisions, as well as optimize what you're doing today. So I want to encourage you to look at that. If you need an example of that, check out our Symphony product, UPS Symphony, and you can see how that can maybe help you run your business better and run it faster, more efficiently. So those are two examples. A more physical example, your delivery representation matters. We sometimes ignore that as a customer, but who's delivering your product to your customer is super important. So is the driver uniform, is the person professional. Those are all aspects of customer satisfaction that help enhance the value of your product when your customers receive it, whether it's in a warehouse, factory, or even at somebody's residence. So when I think of value added, I think of those areas that come immediately to mind, but there's also another 10 others that we could talk about on this call. So I'll turn that back over to you as a couple thought items.
Cool. Yeah, I'll stick with the theme of air freight, and I'll post this next question to Lancelot. So Lancelot, how can businesses leverage predictive analytics to optimize air freight capacity planning?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think that we practice this in multiple fronts, but I just want to highlight the three top ones that we are having. Basically, the demand forecast. So we usually in each of when it comes to capacity planning, we actually need to know our customer forecast volumes, historical data, plus the growth numbers in order to determine the size of the capacity contract we need by route and at what cost, so that we have a target to go into those negotiations. So the second demand forecast we require is actually on a daily and weekly basis over a month. On the execution level, that operations will require that to alter those capacity allocations to ensure that we have adequate capacity to serve the customers into different destination, as well as based on the service level as well. So the last one is actually routing optimizations. So there's a lot of change in the market, opportunity or disruptions. So the analysis will help us to point us to the options for the most efficiency path to achieve the best time in transit for our customers, at the same time at the minimum cost as well for us. So hope I answered the questions.
Thank you, Lancelot. And in the interest of time, I'm going to make sure we cover all of the topics. So I've got a question for warehousing, and I've got a question for the nearshoring industry as well. So I'll start with warehousing. Eddie, I'll pose this question to you. In warehousing and distribution, what innovations are we going to see in 2025? Additionally, what are the challenges in warehousing that businesses should prepare for in the coming years?
Yeah, I'll take it back. Hey, now we got a few minutes here, but just talking about the change from B2B to B2C, those in the warehousing, your largest impacted areas with technology have historically been picking. So when you look beyond picking in 2025, I think it's a combination of the other warehousing functions, inbound, outbound, but also, automated packaging. How can we improve sustainability? How can we improve cube utilization? Et cetera. What was the second part to that, Nirav?
Yeah, the second part is what are the challenges in warehousing that businesses should prepare for in the coming years?
I'm going to go right back to forecasting. The challenge is forecasting. The change, again, B2B, B2C, we are starting to see some of the B2B come back of the big box brick and mortar retailers. So I think having visibility to short and long range planning will help optimize efficiencies within the warehouse. So I would bring that back to forecasting and transparency to make sure that we're making the right changes physically and digitally inside the four walls of the warehouse.
I appreciate it, Eddie. Thank you so much. We have one more minute left, and Aviva, this last question is for you. What industries are likely to benefit the most from nearshoring practices?
Great. Thank you so much, Nirav. So a lot of industries, most industries benefit, for all industries benefit. With that being said, I would kind of tailor it a little bit better, where consumer goods, non-textiles, huge benefit. Even for textiles, it just requires a higher scrutiny to evaluate kind of recent changes to EMEX to validate that your kind of strategy still holds true within those changed environments. Automotive, consumer electronics, healthcare and medical devices, anything that requires a lot of labor in order to produce, again, huge value proposition. So remember, those things will hold true no matter what trade policy is enacted. So thank you so much for the opportunity, Nirav, and for all the attendees.
Thank you, Aviva, and thank you to our guests, to our speakers again. Really great information. You know, we utilized every minute and then some, right? So thanks again for the content that everyone shared. I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar is recorded, so you will have an opportunity to revisit this content again. And any questions that we did not answer during the Q&A will be answered privately after the call. Additionally, at the conclusion of the webinar, there will be a pop-up survey, so please remember to fill in the survey. And again, thank you for joining the 2025 Supply Chain Solutions Outlook webinar.